Okay, perfect. Welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you here with us today for our third and final webinar in our Protecting Migratory Pollinators series. My name is Emily Summerlin. I'm the Communications Manager at Pesticide Action Network. I'm joined by my co-host Shay Peterson from the Northwest Center for Alternatives to Pesticides, and our two wonderful speakers, Tara and Erin, who I will introduce to you shortly. We'll be together for an hour today, and our conversation will cover policy successes and lessons learned from pollinator protection work in Minnesota. Minnesota has led the nation in the amount of pollinator policies authored and passed, both at the state and local levels. And our hope is that what you learn today, you can take back to your own states and communities and apply it to your own pollinator advocacy work. We are in webinar mode here on Zoom today, so all participants are muted with your video off. However, you should be able to see and hear the four of us and see our screens when we're sharing slides. If that is not the case, you can, or you need any other technical support, let us know in the chat box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Tara and Erin will both give their presentations, and at the end we'll have a Q&A session. So please at any point feel free to drop questions into the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end of the hour. This webinar will be recorded and sent out to participants along with resources and the recordings of our previous two pollinator protection webinars. You'll also be able to find the recording on PAN's Honeybee Haven website and NCAP's website. So with that, we can get started. We'll be hearing first from Tara Perello, who is a conservation technician with the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. She assists in development of program technical guidance, tools and outreach regarding vegetation and landscape ecology, and assists in managing the Lawns to Legumes pilot program, which she'll be telling us more about today. So I will stop sharing my screen and you can take it away, Tara.
All right, good morning. Let me find my presentation. Does that work on your end? Okay. And you can hear me? All right, well, good morning. It's good to be with you guys. I'm just going to move a few things around on my screen here. Can't see up on my slides. Okay, so good morning. I'm good to be with you, Tara Perello. I'm with the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and the mission is to improve and protect Minnesota's water and soil resources by working in partnership with local organizations and private landowners. I co-run this program with my coworker, Dan Shaw, who's a senior ecologist at Bowser and has been instrumental in leading the program from the beginning. We have a number of different partners that we've worked with to help get the program going and be what it is. So just a little slide about that. So Lawns to Legumes is a pilot program. It started in June 2019. It was the Minnesota legislature appropriated funding for the new pilot program. So it was $900,000 that was appropriated. And the funding source came from the Environmental Natural Resource Trust Fund, which is a Minnesota State Lottery and investment income source. And so the program focus is to establish pollinator habitat on projects on residential landscapes across Minnesota to support the rusty patch bumblebee and other pollinators. So the Minnesota's, we have a new state bee. It was listed as the endangered species in 2017, the rusty patch bumblebee. So it was the first bee to be declared endangered in the US. And in 2019, Minnesota listed it as the state bee. And so that's kind of been the backbone of the Lawns to Legumes program. And as you may know, the decline of the rusty patch bumblebee has been almost 90% in the last 20 years. And it was once common across the 28 states from Connecticut to the Dakotas. So on the right is kind of a map of where it's at now. So the program has 3 different components that I'm going to go through a little bit more in detail towards the end of the presentation. But to mention, there's the public education and outreach campaign, which provides the technical resources. We have the individual landowner support and the demonstration neighborhood pieces that are the grant focused items. We have granted out the majority of the grant money for the program, but we're continuing to let people know about the free technical resources available that are on our website. We've had a lot of coverage and excitement. This is a reimbursement program. So the one thing I think that's neat about the program is it actually has allowed renters and residential landowners to both participate. So throughout the past year and into the fall, workshops have covered a number of these items in greater detail. So our workshops are covering the conservation challenges that pollinators face, creating pollinator habitat and resiliency, the stacked benefits of pollinator projects, grant program details, the resources that are available on Bowser and Blue Thumb's website. And I guess I just realized I don't think I mentioned that we're partnering with the Blue Thumb and Metro Bloom's organizations to help run the individual support component of the program. So Blue Thumb is a public-private partnership that has over 50 organizations working together to teach landowners about reducing runoff and improving water quality. And then Metro Blooms coordinates Blue Thumb and is a nonprofit that promotes gardening and beautifying communities. And so with this pilot program, we've had a number of different items that we've been able to create to help with the program. And so we have on the left is the Planting for Pollinators habitat guide. And so that's a really great resource that covers residential pollinator habitat from beginning to end. It does talk about integrated pest management in there. And on the right is some templates that we've created to kind of help give people a start to doing a project, whether it's in the shade or sun. We have one for a rain garden and one for boulevard gardens. So those are great ways to get started. In the beginning, we were holding a lot of in-person presentations and workshops, tabling events, but just like with everyone during COVID, we've had to convert to doing stuff online. But we've still noticed a high number of folks that are interested in participating. This program is really allows you to still work on a project at your home. And so since everybody's at home, it's been really a high interest, I think, still. And then this is just a list of our accomplishments. There's a number of them that I'll kind of keep talking about throughout this presentation, but we have received national attention. There was a feature in the Oprah magazine last January. We had over 7,500 people apply for the residential individual support grants. We did a lot of outreach at our state fair in 2019, a lot of workshops. And on the left side, just to kind of gather numbers. So when we hit the 1-year mark, we kind of tallied, where we're at, and we had over 33,000 people access the program's website. So kind of in a relation, that's half the seats in the US Bank Stadium or for the Vikings. And then on the right is we had applications. So the 7,500 applications for individual support were received from people in 84 of Minnesota's 87 counties. And so it was pretty exciting to find that out and see that, it really was across the state. There it was like 1 or 2 people in certain counties, but it really has spread far. So next, just to touch on, this program promotes 4 different practice types that people can do. And so we have the native pocket plantings, and there's variations of that, such as rain gardens, boulevard plantings, lakeshore buffers. Then we have the beneficial trees, indoor shrubs, pollinator lawns, and pollinator meadows. One of the things I think that is really great about this is these are practices that are available for all different skill levels. So people that are just starting to more advanced. And so like the folks that are just starting could plant trees and shrubs because those are really great ways to still have pollinator floral resources on a tree. And it also might be a way that they can work with any Sydney ordinances that they might have. The program also does promote using Minnesota native plant material, along with few exceptions for the pollinator lawn. But we do talk to folks about using neonic-free plants and then asking nurseries too if the plants that they're going to be purchasing have had neonics. Just two more things is that we do touch a little bit further on site preparation methods on how to do site prep for these sites or these practices. And we do promote the Xerxes Society Organic Site Methods packet that they have, which is really great information. And then talking about maintenance recommendations as well. We also talk to folks about using a diversity of plant material. And so we say when practical, projects must have at least 3 blooming species during the spring, summer, and fall, with higher diversity strongly encouraged. So using milkweed is encouraged to provide monarch habitat as well. There are, so with the 3 different program components, this is just a nice graphic that shows all these components can access the technical resources, which are free. So there's a lot of folks that are still building projects on their own without the grant funding. So the public outreach campaign, it's to build a movement towards public adoption of residential pollinator habitat through outreach and collaboration with our partners, increasing awareness of technical resources that allow residents to undertake projects on their own. And then we've been teaming up with the Minneapolis College of Art and Design students on their beautiful artwork, which in the bottom right of this screen is one of those examples. But we've been sharing their artwork and presentations, social media, and just to increase awareness about the pollinators in the pilot program. We've also, on our website, we have a number of other resources such as an ecological gardening blog that we just started. There's lists of the vendors that are out there that provide the native plant material, folks for install and maintenance, and like a pollinator toolbox. So with the individual support component, this is where there's the cost share, workshops, coaching, and technical resources. As I mentioned, the 7,500 people had applied. We did have rounds this past year that were in February, June, and September. We had over 100 coaches that signed up statewide. So all of those coaches are helping folks that were awarded if they needed extra assistance to manage their project. We have funding to kind of fund between 700 and 1,200 grants. And next year, since we have already kind of allocated all that money, we're going to know next year if there's additional funding to, if not all of it has been used, if we're able to open it up again. So, and then I guess over close to 2,000 people attended workshops, which is really great. With the individual support, folks have 1 year to complete their project, and people already, finished some of their projects this past season. We did do some ranking so folks were chosen through a randomized lottery drawing, and priority was given to folks that were in the Rusty Patch Bumblebee area. But we also factored in the geographic distribution across the state, along with environmental justice and equity factors. And when folks were signing up for this application, it was on the Blue Thumb website, and there was several different, like over 20 different things that they kind of had to agree and note that certain things were part of the project. But one that I just wanted to point out was we did have folks mark that they agreed to source Minnesota native plants and seeds from within 150 miles of my location, and any plant must be neonicotinoid free, but that it's important to check with the vendor to ensure their plants are neonic free. So we're able to kind of fold, all the different pollinator needs into this grant, which is great. The demonstration neighborhood component, these are high profile community-wide projects that were intended to enhance pollinator habitat in key corridors and raise awareness for residential pollinator protection and showcase best practices. And so this closed this past January. We have 12 active grantees. And so they are receiving between 20,000 to 40,000 and are working with their local residents to develop these projects in key corridors for pollinator habitat. And this also was ranked by an interagency team, but it was really open up. You can see in the WHO section, it was open up to a number of different groups, which was new to Bowser. So we got a lot of great applicants that we're working with. Just to point out, the conservation corridors are continuous patches of vegetation that are connected to these larger natural areas. And so this connection allows, habitat for movement of plants and animals. But for the pollinators, we're teaching it about it being kind of like those pollinator patches or safe zones so that there's less distance to travel and refuel. So that's a big part of having all these practices in all different areas. The demonstration neighborhood, it's kind of similar requirements for the individual support. There's a little bit more length maybe to the agreement, how many years to have it in place, but we left the definition of neighborhood open-ended to really allow applicants to determine how to effectively establish the demonstration projects to benefit pollinators in their area. And again, just teaching about placing away from pesticide use, and then the minimum up to 3 acres, no minimum size. So for the future and building momentum of this pilot program, we're continuing to engage the public through collaboration with our partners, focusing outreach on the value of residential plantings to support pollinator populations. We're building on this project or this pilot through future funding sources, outreach, and technical resources. And then we did apply for the Legislative Citizen Commission Minnesota Resources, so that's LCCMR, for a phase 2 to continue doing a similar program, but also expanding it to schools and community parks. Since right now it's just residential, we've had a huge interest to kind of expand it. So we did apply for that, and we currently are recommended for $993,000 for that, but we will not know until next summer. But I also just want to mention we're interested in partnering with other states. We have done a lot of this legwork and are just interested in sharing our efforts and learning new ideas. And so this is a program that you can adapt to your area, and talk with us if you have any questions moving forward. And then this is just a slide we kind of have on a lot of different presentations. Just a reminder of how you can participate. You can spread the word about these resources that are available, as well as starting a project on your own. But we also do talk to folks about the Bumblebee Watch and iNaturalist, those apps that are tracking the movement of all of these species. And I just downloaded them myself this summer, and it's been really fun to learn. That's one of the things I've been learning this summer is my pollinators, because my background is in landscape design, and so I have a lot of plant knowledge and all of that, but the pollinator piece has been really fun to learn. And so also just following us on social media, there's a lot of information and outreach happening there. So that's the majority of my presentation, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara. If you, okay, great. So, yeah, a reminder, I know Shay just typed it in. If you have any questions for Tara about the Lawns to Legumes program, you can drop them into the Q&A or the chat box. And next up, we'll be hearing from Erin Rupp, but it looks like we've lost her from our webinar, which is bad timing. So maybe Shay, do you want to send her an email real quick and see if she's having any trouble getting back on? And then if there are any questions for Tara, we can go ahead and do some of those right now while we wait for Erin. I see a question. How were you able to achieve original funding?
Yes, good question. So a lot of there was a couple of different representatives in Minnesota that authored the bill to protect pollinators, and so it came through the legislature that they were able to appropriate that funding, and so that came last June. There's more to it that I'm still kind of learning myself since I just started, and there's a lot to it, but you know, the representatives that helped author it have been very involved in all their conservation efforts as well. So it
Awesome.
really took off.
Thanks, Tara.
Yeah.
It looks like we have Erin back, which is great. I will share my screen again real quick. And again, I see we already have another question coming in for Tara as well. So we'll do the rest of those at the end. So next up, we'll be hearing from Erin Rupp, who is the founder and educational director of the Minnesota nonprofit Pollinate Minnesota. Pollinate Minnesota is an education and advocacy organization, and Erin is a skilled nonprofit leader and professional pollinator educator, translating the specifics of pollination and pollinator decline to both second graders and Minnesota state legislators. She served on Minnesota Governor Dayton's Committee for Pollinator Protection, and has been a hobby beekeeper for 13 years. So I will stop sharing my screen and it's all you, Erin.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Sorry for the stress of my computer just shutting down. I tried to open Word to double check some data that I'm sharing, and then it just froze up. So can you see my PowerPoint and now the full screen of my PowerPoint? Cool. Okay, so I'm going to try to cover a lot in a short amount of time. It's such an honor to be here with you all and to be on this webinar with Tara and with Bowser and the Lawns to Legumes program. It's a really cool model for how to do this work. And so a little bit more about me. I started Pollinate Minnesota in 2015, and we do education and advocacy. So I keep bees at schools. We're a nonprofit. And I've been beekeeping, for 13 years. Here's me on my birthday a few years ago catching a swarm. I have a traveling observation hive that most years I can bring to classes. And then most years I do this work too, right, of bringing folks to my hives. I have the joy of, in my life, of having little bodies in big beekeeping suits around me a lot. And I also have the humbling honor of being around all this bravery. Which is really fun. So this is the work that Pollinate Minnesota does. We're working on translating this to online experiences, which will be available for folks around the country. We also do some habitat install stuff. And I teach this way because, as we know, pollinators are struggling, right? So building more environmental stewards is important, but then also pollinators as a topic issue are such an incredible way to connect to state standards. And if that's something that anybody wants to talk to me more about, let me know. But I do this work for adults as well. And then since 2013, since before the founding of Pollinate Minnesota, when I was working within a small business, have been doing advocacy work too. So with that, small business had a pesticide kill at our hives and passed some pollinator friendly policy here in Minnesota in 2014. So I'm active at the legislature and on Governor Dayton's pollinator committee and at the state and local level. We know why pollinators are struggling. These are interacting factors. This isn't the most beautiful way that you'll see this information represented, right? But bees are hungry. We don't have the habitat we used to have. They have parasites and diseases and viruses, species specific and interspecies thing. This photo that I have is a honeybee with that varroa mite that we talk a lot about. On the back of her abdomen. I don't know if you can see my arrow circling around that mite now, but then the most significant unaddressed issue for pollinators continues to be exposure to pesticides. And both acutely and what the organization, the Pollinator Stewardship Council, calls delayed acutely exposures, these sublethal exposures that won't kill you outright. And here in Minnesota, we, you know, I'll talk more about this in a bit, but we continue to not address this decline reason significantly as the rest of our country it doesn't, right? My negatives were not necessarily in the right order in that sentence. I hope it came off grammatically. The Xerces Society put together this awesome report a few years ago about how neonics can kill bees. This image is from that. We use this class of insecticides. We talk about them a lot because scientific consensus is really sound about their driver in pollinator decline, and because they're the most widely used insecticide in the world. Most of this use is in seed treatments and is not captured. It's captured in these diagrams, but when we consider pesticide exposure routes, it's not captured because of this loophole from the EPA. And that class of chemistry is a known driver of pollinator decline, but there's, most insecticides kill insects, right? And insecticides are not the only thing that bees are exposed to out in the ecosystem. Fungicides are a major player. Herbicides kill food for pollinators. They're a major player. And all of those things, for honeybees, they forage 2 to 3 miles away from their hive. They're picking up a whole number of things. When you register your pesticide with the EPA, you don't have to name how that chemistry interacts with all the others that are already registered in the environment or specifically in a honeybee hive. So there's a lot that is that science is ongoing and we're learning more about. So here in Minnesota, we've been doing a lot. We care about this issue a lot. This organization, the Minnesota Environmental Partnership, surveys us every few years to figure out how we feel about different environmental issues. We care a lot about pollinator decline. So this is from a few years ago, but 87% of us ranked this as a high priority issue, high concern for us. And we're seeing that policies are happening at the state level, at the local level. We have about 50 pollinator friendly communities here. This is a program that's pretty similar to the Xerces Society's Bee City and Bee Campus USA programs. So getting municipalities to pass policy to protect pollinators is the goal of all of these. And we have continued to do most years. 2019, well, 2020 was an exception with the pandemic, and but most years we contribute significant state dollars towards this issue. Both to the habitat programs like Lawns to Legumes that Tara talked about, and then also just coordinating the state policy work that happens at our agencies and also doing research. A number of years ago, we contributed almost, I think it was like $8.7 million to our University of Minnesota Bee Lab. And it was able to expand that Bee Lab's work from Yeah, so they focus on honeybee research and also native bee research. And in spite of all this money, we pollinator populations haven't recovered. Um, this is something I think I included in the summary, but there was some policy analysis of just like who around the country is passing policy to protect pollinators. And here in Minnesota, both at the state and the local level, both passed and authored. We lead the nation in that. And our both governors, our recent one, Governor Walz, and then Governor Dayton, who served before Governor Walz, have passed executive orders to protect pollinators. This is a picture of the governor's pollinator committee that I served on. We met for 2 years to make recommendations to our state agencies. And it's significant. We have an environmental quality board here, which is a group of agencies that deal with the environment. Deal with is a funny word, but are interacting with the environment, that meet to talk and share about environmental issues. We've had an interagency pollinator protection team since 2016 as part of that EQB work. So Tara mentioned that briefly, but that's a significant state investment in ongoing agency level work on this issue. And they author a report every year, and our 2021 is coming out actually later today. And yeah, it's exciting, but you know, bees continue to struggle. We talk a lot about honeybees because they're pretty easy to capture data on. So the Bee Informed Partnership does this survey of beekeepers. Nationally, we're still losing, close to 40% of our colonies. Minnesota colony loss is higher than national average. Yeah, so that's if you do everything right as a beekeeper, maybe somebody with 13 years of experience or 3 generations. If you do everything right and your average death is half of your hives, that's substantial, right? And that's just honeybees. Tara talked about the rusty patch bumblebee being endangered. 6 of our other 23 species are approaching that status. If you look at overall biomass of insects and ecosystems, it's really striking, just the numbers of insects that we're losing. And so this bottom half of my slide is from a German study where entomologists have been just surveying amount of insect bodies in the wildlife management area, or like natural park by their house for 30 years. And I've seen that number go down by 75%. This has been captured in the media in a number of different ways. I really recommend this New York Times article about it. It captures it well. But if we don't address pesticide exposures, and if they're as large as they are, we're going to continue to see this total destruction of the base of our ecosystems, right? Like insects do a whole lot. And we talk about pollinators when we talk about insects doing a whole lot, because we have this economic way to capture that whole lot of work, right? The like yield of fruits and vegetables that pollinators are helping us to produce. But bees are food too for a lot of different things. Insects are food for so many things. Yeah, they're really the base of the ecosystem, and if we lose them at the rate that we're going to continue to see the incredible, devastating changes to the rest of the ecosystem. Yeah, so here in Minnesota, we're seeing that, and it's because we're not doing the pesticide addressing. And to share a little bit more about just like honeybees in context, we use them as a data point, right? It's way easier for me to open up a hive and see if they're alive or dead than it is to dig in the ground and find that native bee nest to see if they're alive or dead, right? Here in Minnesota, we have 450 different species of native bee. Most of them are solitary. Most of those live in nests in the ground. About 30% have nests and stems. honeybees are way easier to gather data on. They're critically important to the way that we grow food. And they're also at the pesticide registration level, the species that is used to test a new chemistry on all terrestrial invertebrate species. So I put terrestrial species, that's false, right? I'm talking about invertebrates, so everybody without an exoskeleton. And I need to double check if that's terrestrial invertebrates or terrestrial arthropods, which means that you have this hard outer shell. So spiders too, right? Yeah. And honeybees, this system that they live in with queens and drones and workers and big boxes that we can keep them in and move them really easily with their intense amount of larvae and eggs. The queen lays what, like 2,000 eggs a day. With this honeycomb that we're familiar with, that life cycle is so different from these stem nesters, from these soil nesters who instead of, 2,000 babies a day have 12 in their lifetime. And we'll build these really nice little homes for those larvae to grow in stems in the soil, put some pollen there, let them grow, right? Have them hatch out as adults next year. Or honeybees are way different than bumblebees too, right? Who live subsocially during the summer months, have this colony all together, and then overwinter as queens. And both of these images are from the Xerces Society and other folks. Yeah, and that's just bees, right? Like honeybees are way different than spiders and way different than all kinds of other stuff. And we know that honeybee exposure levels to pesticides are, they can tolerate higher exposures than most of our solitary bees. And can tolerate higher exposures than our bumblebees, who are bigger, right? They're like have these nice fat cute bodies, right? But can tolerate less pesticide on the individual level and the colony level than honeybees can. So if we're using honeybees as the metric at the EPA for the registration of these chemicals, that's false, right? That does not capture the way that this pesticide interacts in the ecosystem. Yeah. So this is a wonderful graph that the U of M Bee Lab did of just our species here in Minnesota. And there's ways that this data is captured nationally too. I think national bee species numbers, and Tara, you may know more than other folks on the call may know more than me, but it's something like 2,000 or 3,000 different species. We also talk about honeybees because they do this critical work for our food system. So this is labor that beekeepers in Minnesota are doing right now in the middle of this work of moving their bees out to pollinate different crops. And most of our Midwest beekeepers do this work out in California, pollinating almonds. So the work, the ways that Minnesota treats our bees are critically important to our national food security, right? Yeah, we're usually like 5th or 4th or 7th in terms of honey production, in terms of number of commercial beekeepers who live here. And the reason we're relying on commercial beekeepers to do this work is because our food system relies on honeybee pollination. And so Whole Foods did this a few years ago. So without honeybee pollination, we wouldn't have the produce variety that we have. So that a third of everything we eat is most of our fruits and nuts and vegetables, because we grow in monoculture. So we pay beekeepers to do that work of moving their hives around the country. And we eat a lot of things that aren't insect pollinated. So that's a third of everybody number. So here in Minnesota, we're doing different things, right? And lessons that I have to share with you are just that programs like Lawns to Legumes have been an incredible way to communicate this issue, and an incredible way to address one of these other stressors that are very real for bees, right? Like habitat. There isn't food for bees, and they need food, right? They need that to be clean food. So we need to address pesticide exposures too. But the way that Lawns to Legumes has done it, to as somebody applying, you go through this whole suite of questions saying, learning more about where pesticide exposure could impact your garden and pledging to reduce that exposure, right? So Pesticides make money for the companies that manufacture them, right? I included this statistic. This is the one that crashed my computer trying to look this up. um, just to confirm, I think these are accurate numbers and I'm going to double check. But in 2018, Bayer and Syngenta and the other folks who profit off of neonics made $4.32 billion. And this isn't an exact comparison, right? But if you look at median farmer income, in the US that same year, it was negative $1,500. So this is a political piece of the puzzle, pesticide exposure reduction. There's a lot of power when you look at reducing this. And so politically, it can be more feasible to do these habitat programs. And also, it's much more feasible to start on a smaller scale with your local municipalities. So starting in your community. And then the really powerful thing that that community level work does is that it communicates your commitment to this issue, and sharing that your community passed a resolution, your school district passed a resolution, or even that you planted this garden or that you are working on this grant program for habitat. Communicating that to all the elected officials below and above you is a cool way to continue this, stewardship. Cool. So this is what our community-friendly, pollinator-friendly resolution includes. Bee City USA is very similar to this, but figuring out who to talk to, current best management practices, and then building awareness and power. Bees hold our attention and our hearts. And here for me personally, I've been doing this work of pollinator advocacy for about the same amount of time that I've been a beekeeper, so 13 years. And the amount that we understand this issue and the complexity of this issue has only increased. It's really exciting. Yeah. So I'll leave this slide up. I don't know if I'm at 20 minutes or if I did a better job of managing my time than I usually do, but cool. I think I can be done now and can talk more about other things in the questions.
Thank you, Erin. All right. So I think we have a few questions already in the chat in the Q&A box. Shay's having a little bit of trouble accessing the Q&A box. So and she's going to be facilitating our Q&A session. So you can also just type questions into the chat box so she can see them. Shay, I think we have a few to start off with if you want to take it away.
Okay, our first question was from Ashley, and this is to Tara. Have you been able to visit and see any of the plantings that have gone in for your project?
Oh, good question. I actually was able to go see, I was invited to a demonstration neighborhood in the city of Brooklyn Park in first week of October. They held a celebration at one of their sites that put in a number of different rain gardens and an affordable housing facility. And so was able to kind of get the community involved in helping plan those projects and doing install and then a celebration. So it was really great to be a part of that and meet a number of the other city officials and other folks that had also maybe some other funding too that went into that larger project. For the smaller, individual support component side, a lot of those folks are sending in, or how it's designed is that the reimbursement, they send in before and after photos of their project and their receipts and their match for the project. And so I see things through that lens. But yes, there's a number of folks that are starting for both the individual and the demonstration. So it's been kind of neat to see photos coming in of where people are at.
Great, thank you. Next, Nancy, this was not a question, but she shared a link with everybody for you around the chat box. It looks like it's from the Environmental Health Trust. And then let's go to the next question. So Tara, did LTL explore having partnerships with local seed and plant sellers to ensure folks in the program have a go-to place for Minnesota native and pesticide-free seeds and plants? Oh, you're muted, Tara.
Sorry, I was looking for it in the chat because sometimes it helps to read the question too.
It should be towards the bottom there.
The bottom, okay.
Yeah.
I can't find it for some reason. Okay, so can you just briefly say it again? They're wondering if we've worked with nurseries.
Sure. It says, did L2L explore having partnerships with local seed and plant sellers to ensure folks in the program have a go-to place for Minnesota native plants and pesticide-free seeds and plants?
Okay. We actually offered, so there's a link on the Minnesota Department of Natural Resource website that offers all of the vendor lists for the native plant nurseries across the state, and kind of lists different consultants as well. And so that was the main link that we provided to folks so they can access where to go. You know, there's maybe not all of the nurseries were on there, but the majority of them are. So there's new ones coming all the time. And then also there was a Wild Ones chapter, which has a great website that has a nice brochure that lists where the native plant nurseries are in the state too. So that was a big piece. You know, there was always native plant sales maybe that were happening that, you know, folks could also access, but just keep reminding them that to go after the Minnesota native plants. So that was a big piece for everyone too, to learn what native plants are and what cultivars are. So the cultivars and all of that were able to be planted, but it just wasn't able to be funded is the main thing.
Great. So as a follow-up, Willa had a question for you as well. Can you talk more about the national attention this project has gotten? Have you talked with other states about implementing similar projects?
Yeah, there's we just got a call from or coordinating it with somebody in Montreal to kind of talk through some of the programming. My coworker Dan has fielded a number of the calls too for folks that are interested in the program. We've had over 126 different articles published about the program, so that's kind of been nationwide, all different groups. There's one, Mother Earth News is going to post something next season, so we're kind of working with them. So it's been really interesting to see all the different groups contacting us and holding presentations or doing interviews on TV. There was some news, Fox Channel News or Fox 9 News in March, right before COVID. There was some outreach that happened. So a lot more was taking place when we had the grant funding open and we're trying to promote the application period. But we're still, you know, talking with folks now because it's still important to recognize that there's a lot of technical resources available to build projects on your own.
Can I throw in on the native plant question that our Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has a list of native plant growers and sellers. And so there's a lot of ways, and I think Lawns to Legumes might have shared that. There's a lot of ways into this work, right? So amassing those kind of resources can be something that your state agency or even community can do, right? And then to Nancy's point about the cell towers and microwaves and kind of radiation and pollinator decline, that's been, from my understanding, debunked. and also have been learning more about where that theory came from. And there's some link between the pesticide companies and throwing that theory out. So the way that pesticides are in our environment, especially these neonicotinoid insecticides with their very stable formulations that don't break down, you know, if they're buried, they never break down. You know, their half-life is really long. Their exposure is you know, on par with the way that cell towers may be, you know, like it's an equally huge ecosystem thing. And wouldn't that be a huge thing, right? If our cell phones were the thing that were killing bees, but actually it's another huge billion-dollar conglomerate that's doing this ecosystem damage.
Great. So our next question was for Erin. Do you know of any other pollinator education orgs like yours in other states?
Yeah, so there is, the most notable like bee and youth organization in the country, I think, is Bee Girl organization out in Oregon, but she they work with beekeeper groups around the country to provide their education services. And I think that there are examples, there definitely are examples in other places. Colorado has a museum that's committed to pollinators. And in terms of the hands-on piece of my program, I'm not sure that everybody's doing it that way, but the Whole Kids Foundation, which is a grant through or a granting arm through Whole Foods, has partnered with the Honeybee Conservancy, which is another notable honeybee education organization, to offer grants to get hives at schools. And they have bulked up that program now. It used to just be a page and it was like, here, go do this and make sure you get a beekeeper, which is, for my opinion, not the right way to do it. But now it's a pretty extensive resource rich application and program. Yeah. And I think my contact has been shared and will be shared, but if folks want help doing that matching work, I can share what I know from other places.
Awesome, thank you. Janine had a question. She's in Washington State and she would like to bring to her county conservation district some of the programs like you guys are talking about. She's wondering if that would be the most appropriate place locally, and then would the programs translate well to a county extension or a conservation district, and how do we access all those technical resources? So I think that can go to you, both of you.
Yeah, I think it would be a great start to bring it to all those different groups. Here in Minnesota, all those groups definitely work together. And I can send the link to Emily and Shay for Launch Legumes and we'll get that out to everyone as well. That's not a problem. You know, all of these, or this program, you know, really works on the stacked benefits too for the different conservation practices that, you know, the county conservation district is doing, or so reducing soil erosion, improving habitat, improving water quality, and adding pollinator benefits to all the different practices is really a positive thing. At least with the Launch Legumes program, we've worked a lot with the extension program here as well, and the master gardeners have been really essential in being a part of the program and helping be coaches and helping you know, folks in their area too. And so whether it is through email or on the phone, or people are doing virtual tours, you know, virtual site visits with their phones, there's still ways to be interactive and share our knowledge with each other.
And I think that through this web, we'll be sharing the Launch to Legumes main page, right? But also Bowser has a pollinator toolkit that we'll also share, but just a whole bunch of those technical resources in one place. Yeah.
Great. Erin, did you have anything else you wanted to add really quick before I move on to the last question? Okay, so our last question was for Erin. What messages and stories have been best for educating elected officials on pollinator issues and transforming them into leaders who will move this work forward?
Through our governor's committee work, we got to see our Minnesota Zoo is part of the state, and we got to see some butterfly conservation work that the zoo is doing. And the species of butterfly, it's either the power chic skipper or Dakota skipperling. They're rearing both, but one of them as a caterpillar lives on grass. It builds a little, like, it's not a cocoon because they're still a caterpillar, but this little house for themselves out of grass, and they live at the base of a grass plant. And so the researcher at the U, who's an expert on this subject, right? He's a doctor of butterflies, has never seen this caterpillar in the wild. So just the complexity of who pollinators are in ecosystems and what we can know about them just because of our size and our ability to see and do things as humans is limited, but it's also the extent that we do know doesn't stand in the way of that, right? Like, ecosystems are cool and complex, and we need to do what we can with the knowledge that we have to save them. And I think that story really captures my heart, and I don't know if it's necessarily that's the thing that influences legislators, but sharing, I've had conversations with folks who have been very closed off to this issue, just about who bumblebees are in their life cycles, and just there's all these different hooks with bee biology, and then also our reliance on pollinators for our own health, that I think there's something in here that captures everybody, right? Yeah.
Awesome. I think that was the end of our question session. Wait, one more. So also with your meetings, if you can, I'm sorry, this was just people were asking for resources. So we put the links to our websites in the chat, as well as we'll be posting those webinars. So
I'm going to share them up on the screen right now as well.
awesome. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. So thanks, folks. We're just about out of time. Thanks to all of you for attending. Our partners at NCAP for collaborating with us on this series, and a special thank you to our speakers, Tara and Erin, for their excellent presentations and answering all of our questions. As I mentioned earlier, you'll be receiving this webinar recording along with resources via email. You can find more information about this work and our organizations at these websites listed. So Honeybee Haven is a PAN site dedicated to pollinator protection. Resources, pesticide.org is NCAP's website, Pollinate Minnesota, which is Erin's organization, URL is here. And then this last one is the Lawns to Legumes information page. And those are L's, not ones, which I made the mistake of earlier. So it's /L2L for Lawns to Legumes. Thanks again for joining, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.